They say watching your child get married is like handing over a piece of your heart with trust. But what happens when that trust is shattered in the very home you built with your own hands? What I did next, nobody saw coming. Before I tell you, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and make sure to subscribe, because this story, this one, will shake your soul. My name is Helen Davenport. I'm 72 years old, and for 4 decades I worked as a seamstress. Every stitch fed my son Mark. Every dream I postponed was for him. That Sunday morning, I woke up early and made breakfast like I always did. Coffee brewing, pancakes sizzling, sun slipping through the window. I even set out the old cups he used as a boy, hoping to remind him that this house was still home. But when Megan, his wife, came downstairs, she stared at me like I didn't belong. "Ma'am, I told you. You don't have to do this. This isn't your house anymore." She didn't even look up from her coffee. I swallowed the sting and kept cooking. Then Mark walked in, eyes glued to his phone. Megan whispered something to him, and he snapped. "The one who decides here is my wife. If it bothers her, you leave." He said it in my kitchen, in my house, with no shame, no hesitation. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, but permanently. I looked at the untouched breakfast, the warm bread no one thanked me for, and knew I had lost him long before that moment. I went upstairs slowly, packing my clothes, my needles, my glasses into one old suitcase. Everything fit except my broken heart. I walked past them quietly. No one stopped me. At the door, I didn't argue. I smiled, not out of happiness, but pride. I called the bank, closed my accounts, and took every penny that was mine. I walked down the street without looking back. The air was cold, but freeing. I found a cheap motel room, plain walls, a hard bed, but for that night, it was mine. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, I asked myself over and over, was it my fault for staying too long? For loving too much? But love without respect is just a slow kind of erasure. The next morning, the city felt bigger than I remembered. Nobody noticed me. I passed families having breakfast together, and in a shop window I saw my reflection, tired, messy, but with a spark in my eyes that hadn't been there before. I went into a cafe, ordered toast and coffee, and for the first time in years, I ate alone without feeling lonely. A waitress asked, "Are you okay, ma'am?" And her kindness almost made me cry. That day, I realized I couldn't stay in limbo. I called an old friend, Linda, who lived near Central Park. She welcomed me without questions. Her apartment was simple, but it was warm. She hugged me and said, "You don't need permission here." That sentence cracked something open in me. I unpacked my things slowly, arranged my sewing supplies, placed an old photo of Mark as a child on the shelf. From the window, I could hear a violinist in the square. The music filled the silence that used to ache. I made coffee just for myself the next morning, not for anyone else. For me. And it was enough. And it was enough. A couple of days later, the bank confirmed that all my accounts had been transferred to my personal name. No more hidden generosity. No more silent sacrifices. When Linda told me that Mark's card had been declined at the supermarket, I didn't gloat. I just sat back and whispered, it's time he felt what it's like to stand on his own. For years, my money paid for his groceries, vacations, refrigerator, bills, all under his name. He probably thought money just existed. But it didn't. It came from me, from years of saving and sewing late into the night. And when he threw me out, I quietly pulled the foundation from under their feet. Linda brought pastries one afternoon and said, "Helping is good, Helen. Letting them walk all over you isn't." Her words wrapped around me like a soft blanket. That night, I dreamed of Mark as a boy, asking me for milk. I woke up wanting to call him, but I didn't. Missing someone is one thing. Begging to be loved is another. I began writing letters. Not to send, but to finally speak. I wrote everything. The nights I stayed up waiting for his key, the times I forgave without hearing a single thank you. I wrote of Megan's coldness, of the silence that hurt more than the shouting. I tied the letters with a red ribbon and hid them in a box, like a part of my pain finally had a place to rest. One morning, Linda told me something that made my heart pound. She had run into a neighbor who asked Megan if I still lived in the house. Megan had answered with her usual arrogance. She decided to leave. It was about time, and the neighbor replied, "That's odd, we all thought that house was hers." I imagined Megan's face freezing mid-stride. For years, I'd kept quiet while she rewrote my history, and now someone else said the truth aloud. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. Quiet, everyday justice. For the first time in a long time, I felt something settle inside me. Not joy, not bitterness. Just peace. But life wasn't done yet. One evening, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I saw her. Sophie, my 13-year-old granddaughter, backpack hanging from one shoulder, eyes red. "I couldn't take it anymore, Grandma," she whispered. She had run away from their house. I hugged her tight as she cried into my chest, trembling like a leaf. She told me about the shouting, the cold walls, the loneliness. "Can I stay here?" she asked, like she was asking permission to exist. I held her hands and said, "You don't need to ask to find refuge here." That night, she fell asleep holding me like she did when she was little. And I realized that sometimes love doesn't end. It simply finds a new direction. The first night Sophie slept beside me, I barely closed my eyes. She clung to me like a child hiding from a storm, and in a way, she was. In the morning, I made her hot chocolate and warm bread with butter. She ate slowly, her eyes puffy but her shoulders a little less tense. "Can I stay another day?" she asked timidly. "As many as you need," I said. And for the first time in weeks, I saw a real smile flicker across her face. We spent the day together. She helped me fold laundry, water the plants, and learned how to thread a needle without twisting it. There was something beautiful about watching her hands fumble, then steady, as if she were also learning how to rebuild. Linda baked cookies that afternoon, and the apartment filled with the smell of vanilla and butter. It didn't look like much, just 3 souls in a small apartment, but it felt more like home than that big, cold house ever did. Days passed, and Sophie's laughter started to echo through the walls. At night, she would fall asleep quickly, no longer stiff with fear. I knew Mark hadn't called yet, not about me, not about his daughter. Maybe he was too ashamed, or maybe too lost in the chaos he created, but the silence was telling. One evening, as the sky turned a soft pink, there was a knock on the door. Not the doorbell, a firm, deliberate knock. My chest tightened. I didn't have to look to know. I peeked through the peephole anyway. Mark stood there, hands empty, face drawn. I didn't open, not out of hate, out of peace. Some silences speak louder than any confrontation. He walked away slowly, shoulders hunched like the boy he once was, but he was no longer my little boy. He was a man facing his own choices. I leaned my forehead against the door and let my heart settle. Not everything deserves immediate forgiveness. That night, I dreamed of my late husband, Robert. In the dream, we were in our old kitchen, the one where life still felt simple. He was frying eggs and turned to me with that warm smile. "Have you forgiven yourself yet?" he asked. I woke up breathless. I hadn't, not fully. The following week, Linda whispered something to me over breakfast. "I didn't want to tell you like this, but they're repossessing Mark's car. And he's drowning in debt. The banks have cut him off." I didn't flinch. I'd been expecting it. Years of bills magically paid, credit cards miraculously balanced. It had all been me. Quietly, consistently, without acknowledgement. Now that I wasn't there, the scaffolding was gone. And the house of cards was collapsing. I imagined Megan at the bank, demanding explanations, trying to keep control. I pictured Mark staring at the unpaid notices, confused at a world where things didn't just work out. It wasn't joy I felt, it was clarity. That night, thunder shook the windows. Sophie got scared and ran to my bed. I held her close and sang the same lullaby I used to sing to Mark when he was little. Her breathing slowed, her tiny fists unclenched. In that moment, I understood something profound. Love doesn't end. It simply shifts. My heart was no longer bending itself for people who disrespected me. It was now sheltering someone who still had time to grow in it. A few days later, Linda came home with gossip she tried to deliver gently. "Megan is trying to sell the house," she said carefully. I froze. My house. The house Robert and I built brick by brick, stitch by stitch. The house where my son took his first steps, where we said our last goodbye to his father. And she was trying to sell it like a second-hand purse. I opened my folder. The original deed, property tax receipts, legal papers, all in my name. I didn't need to storm over there. I didn't need to shout. The paper spoke louder than any argument. Mark eventually found the deed. Linda heard through the grapevine that he sat in silence holding the papers while Megan ranted. And then he said the words I'd waited years to hear. It was never ours. Those 4 words weren't an apology, they were a recognition. And that was enough to make something deep inside me unclench. Meanwhile, Sophie was flourishing. She helped me pick out a potted plant for the balcony, a lush green one we named Teresa after my mother. Every time I watered it, I felt roots forming inside me too. My mornings became rituals: hot coffee, sunlight on my face, Sophie's soft footsteps in the kitchen. There was a quiet strength growing in our little corner of the world. Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my stomach tighten. "Mark." The message was simple. "Can we talk?" "I miss you." I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't the words themselves. It was everything they carried. Years of silence, entitlement, distance. A single text couldn't rebuild what he had broken with his voice that morning in my kitchen. I deleted it. No reply. No explanations. I stood on the balcony and watched an elderly couple walking hand in hand below. They moved slowly, with the unspoken understanding that comes only from shared history. I once thought Mark would grow up with that kind of example. But he chose a different path, a path of convenience over respect. And now that the storm had come, he was reaching for the umbrella he'd thrown away. Not this time. My work gave me solace. One day I found an old wedding dress I'd sewn decades ago for a young bride who never made it to the altar. The dress had yellowed slightly but was still beautiful, like me, perhaps forgotten but not lost. I decided to restore it, not for sale, but for myself. Each stitch was like mending a piece of my own heart. As I worked, Linda watched silently. "It's beautiful," she whispered. She wasn't just talking about the dress. She was talking about me. When it was done, I hung it by the window. The lace caught the light, glowing softly like hope rediscovered. A few days later, a young woman knocked on the door. She'd heard from someone that I could bring dresses back to life. She tried the restored dress on, and tears filled her eyes. "It fits like it's always known me," she whispered. She offered to buy it, but I refused money. Instead, I asked her to never forget it. That was enough. That night, I left the window open. A warm breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of new beginnings. For the first time in months, I didn't feel empty. I felt whole, not because Mark had changed, but because I had. Then, one afternoon, there was another knock. Not Mark, Megan. She stood in the doorway, disheveled, makeup smudged, pride gone. She entered quietly, sat down, and whispered, "You were right." I ruined everything. And then she knelt. Not for theatrics, not for manipulation. For the first time, she truly broke. "I was cruel to you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I can't take it anymore." I didn't hug her. I didn't scold her. I simply handed her a napkin and let the silence hold her accountable. My granddaughter watched from the hallway, wide-eyed. This moment would be etched into her memory, not because I shouted, but because I stood in quiet strength. Megan left with nothing but honesty hanging in the air. And that was more than she'd ever given me before. The morning after Megan's visit, I woke up with a strange calm. The kind that doesn't come from everything being perfect, but from knowing you've stopped begging for what's already gone. I made coffee while the early light poured through the curtains. Sophie was still asleep, tangled in her blanket, her breathing soft. Linda hummed from her room. The square outside was quiet, almost reverent. Then came the doorbell. Once, twice. Clear, steady. I didn't need to guess, it was Mark. Linda appeared in the hallway, her eyes asking if I wanted her to answer. I shook my head. Sophie peeked out, but I gestured for her to stay back. I opened the door. He stood there with his head lowered, hands empty, eyes tired. He looked older than he was, like life had finally caught up with the choices he'd made. "Can I come in?" he asked softly. I nodded, not out of weakness, but because this was a conversation I needed for me, not for him. He sat at the table where I now enjoyed peaceful breakfasts, the same table where I'd taught Sophie how to thread a needle. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he finally said, "I know what we did." There's no excuse. He told me everything about the sleepless nights, the fights with Megan, the silence that had turned their home into a cold battlefield. "I thought pushing you away was protecting my marriage," he admitted. His voice cracked. I was wrong. I let him talk. I didn't interrupt. I wanted to hear his words, not fill in the blanks like I'd always done. When he finished, I said quietly, "I didn't leave you, Mark. You threw me out." His eyes closed, and his shoulders dropped under the weight of that truth. "I'm not asking you to come back," he whispered. "I know I can't. I just needed you to hear me." I watched him, not as a mother desperate to save her son, but as a woman who had finally learned her worth. "I don't leave places where I'm wanted anymore," I said calmly. "I stay where I can breathe." Something in him broke then, not the dramatic, movie kind of break, but the quiet kind, the real kind. He lowered his head like the little boy who once ran into my arms after scraping his knees. But I didn't move toward him. I stayed in my seat. The distance between us wasn't punishment. It was truth. We sat in silence. Then I stood and poured him a cup of coffee. It wasn't forgiveness. It was presence. And for now, that was enough. Months passed. Sophie split her time between my home and his. She laughed more, talked more, slowly reclaiming her childhood from the shadows of their conflict. Mark visited occasionally, less silence, more sincerity. No promises, no grand gestures. Just time doing what time does best, revealing who's willing to change. Eventually, I made a decision. I sold the house myself on my terms, legally, calmly, deliberately. What I received from it, I used to rebuild a life that was finally mine. I bought a sturdy sewing table, a modern machine, 3 beautiful chairs, no more, no less. The restored wedding dress hung proudly on my wall, not as a relic, but as a flag. Every time I looked at it, it reminded me of who I'd become. I started teaching sewing to young women from the neighborhood, not just how to hold a needle, but how to hold themselves. They listened to me with bright, hungry eyes. Some had no mothers. Some had mothers who were too tired to speak. I poured my quiet strength into every lesson. I showed them that dignity can be stitched back together, thread by thread. Sometimes, on quiet afternoons, I baked cornbread the way I used to. The smell filled the apartment with memories, but it didn't hurt anymore. Because this time, it was mine. No one ignored it. No one dismissed it. Whoever sat at my table was there because they valued it. One day, while watering the plants, I saw Mark standing on the street below. He didn't call up to me. He didn't demand. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking up. For a split second, the old me stirred. The one who would have rushed to the window, desperate to bridge the gap. But I didn't. I closed the curtain slowly. Not with anger, with peace. Because not everything that shaped your past deserves space in your present. Sophie grew stronger. She started painting. Linda and I became more like sisters than friends. The young women I taught began bringing their friends. My little apartment became a living space, full of chatter, stitches, shared meals, and soft music. I didn't rebuild the life I lost. I built something entirely new. And when the nights got quiet, I would sit on my balcony with a cup of tea, listening to the distant laughter from the square. I'd think about the woman I used to be, the one who kept silent, who gave until she was invisible. She deserved better, and finally, she got it. Because leaving wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning. And you? Yes, you reading this. If you've ever been made to feel small in a place you built with your own hands, if you've ever been told you no longer have a say in a home you held together with love and sacrifice, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not disposable. You are the root, the refuge, the quiet strength generations stand on. Your dignity is not negotiable. And when a woman learns to stand on her own, she never again begs for a seat at someone else's table. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the Elderly Stories channel, give this video a like, and tell me in the comments which moments spoke to you the most, because some stories aren't just told, they're felt. And this is one of them.